Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the Hindi Project podcast. This is actually the first episode I recorded. I recorded this before episode 1, but it didn't make sense to release this without having an intro episode. In this episode, I sit down with Ustadh Hamza Andreas Tzortzis. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. We talk about that a little bit in the podcast. It was a really eye-opening podcast. He was an incredible guest. We talked about a lot of different things from, our relationships with our parents and his relationship with his father, which was really emotional. We talked about the idea of failure and failing and growing from our failures and how we need to be introspective about ourselves and about our weaknesses and about our strengths. There's a lot of good stuff here. I really encourage you to listen to it. We also talked about, the idea of falling into a victimization mindset and a victimization narrative, and whether that's really the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him, whether that's something that we should be embracing as Muslims or not. There's a lot of important information here, and probably this podcast is going to be, it touches upon a lot of themes that we're going to be talking about in all of our podcasts. So I had a lot of fun, and I was really had like an adrenaline pump in myself after recording it because I felt so excited, and I'm sure you guys are going to feel the same way. And here it is. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, I'm really happy to be with, how do you say your last name?
Tzortzis.
Tzortzis. So how do most people say it?
There's ikhtilaf on the issue. Some tortoise, some say Tzortzis, but I'm okay with it. It's very hard.
Tzortzis?
There's too many T's and too many Z's.
Yeah. Honestly, man, I'm sympathetic because my last name, Hindi, it gets abused. One time they had me on TV for some reason, or I don't even remember. But the brothers took a screenshot and they sent it to me, and it was like Ibrahim Hindu.
Oh,
It's
dear.
like,
It's fun.
yeah, subhanAllah. So I know what it's like to have your last name abused. I have to say this, subhanAllah, this gathering, and you've gathered so many imams from Canada to come here to London to sit in this gathering, to learn from you about, basically the work you've been doing for probably the last 15 years?
Yeah, well, maybe more 10 years.
10 years or so. So many, like for me, it's like I have these notes and I'm like scribbling down like, I learned this, and this was really interesting. And one of the things that's really struck me is how self-critical you've been.
Yes.
Like you're just like, I made a mistake here in the past, and this is what I learned from it. And I made a mistake here when I was giving da'wah, and then I learned from it. And I made a mistake here, and I learned from it. I think it's just like, it's so powerful because most people never want to admit their mistakes, and they never want to be self-critical. And how is that? How did you come to that?
Well, it's conscientiousness, you see. So don't get me wrong, I was never self-critical all the time. But my father, he did instill within me this idea of being conscientious, self-reflective. But I think the important point is that when you get married and you have children, you just have to think more deeply. You just become more serious in some way. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but sometimes circumstances make you, and not just that, in humiliation. I really believe that people should not want to be humiliated, but they should see humiliation as divine mercy and grace, because it's his way of unshackling you and detaching you from, number one, your ego, and number two, people's perceptions. And if you're really sincere that this is about the truth and not me, this is about conveying the call, advancing the prophetic mission, calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then really you need to fix up, because you have a huge responsibility. Because sometimes we have this kind of privilege, like, oh, I deserve to be in this work. No way. This is a huge honor from Allah. So, I've had negative press, I've done massive mistakes, some consciously and unconsciously. I've said things that sometimes I was like, do I really believe in this? There was this like little voice in my head sometimes saying, well, Hamza, is that really you? Or are you just basically, articulating this because you want to win an argument, or you just want to look good? Because Sheikh, the nature of the ego, as you know, it's based on three main things. You want to be right. You never want to be wrong. You want to look good. You don't want to look bad. You want to impose. You don't want to be imposed upon. This was the, shaitanic, if you like, the satanic kind of perspective. He wanted to be right. You know, I'm made of fire, he's made of clay, I'm not going to bow down to Adam. He wanted to look good, and you know, he wanted to impose himself. He doesn't want to bow to no one. People should be bowing to him. So that's the nature of the egos, and I noticed that in myself, so I just had to break it, and circumstances broke it as well, to be honest, which I think is a huge blessing. I remember one sheikh, when he said to me when I was going through like a very, very difficult period, he basically said to me, you're going to see this in a year or 2 years as a huge blessing. And he was right. It was a huge blessing. It was a huge blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think it's all those things combined that make you self-reflective. And also, when you get older, sometimes inevitably you make a decision, right? I need to start thinking about who Allah is even more. So when you start knowing Allah a little bit more, it actually helps you develop, because you actualize the effect of His nature on your life. So if Allah is al-mutakabbir, He's like the majestic, if you like. He is holy, and He is, you know, the prideful is the wrong word to use, I think, wrong translation, but I think people understand what I'm saying. Therefore, you're nothing. So the more you realize your nothingness, it elevates you in other ways. So, and I think it's powerful because it's my way of expressing my sense of duty, because when I got involved in the dawah, there was no one around. We're talking about in 2003, 2004, internet wasn't that great, Facebook wasn't that great, YouTube, I don't think, was it there? I'm not sure. So the point here is, who was there? I had no one to reflect and to speak to. There was no Al-Maghrib Institute, Al-Kawthar Institute. There was no Bayina, or whatever the case may be. So I'm on my own, just copying things from Christians, making mistakes, being a loudmouth. And then over time, I just had to learn from those mistakes. And I feel it's my duty of care to the future du'at, whether they're young or old is irrelevant, to say to them, look, I've done these mistakes. Don't reinvent the wheel. And that's very important. So you don't reinvent the wheel, and in order for people to progress further. So I think that's important.
No, it's powerful. I mean, it's it's like that willingness to learn from your failures. And most people don't want to admit their failures to begin with. And so,
well, Adam alayhi salam failed.
Yeah.
He disobeyed Allah, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Allah mentions it throughout time.
Yeah.
And yet, look at him. He's in paradise. So there you go. So his failure not only elevated him and grant him salvation and success, but it was the means to grant every single human being salvation and success, because really that was the first act of repentance.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, if you're not going to fail, well, if you think you haven't failed on errors, one, you're a liar, or you're blinded to who you really are.
Yeah.
And I think it's very powerful, because you know what? It's self-therapy as well. When you more publicly say, look, I've done this and it has been wrong and it wasn't accurate, or it was basically ego, or it was basically this, that, and the other. It helps you more as well.
For sure.
Yeah, of course, that's how it's supposed to be. So it helps you spiritually and emotionally, because it helps you give meaning to your mistakes. Because I don't want to look back on my, say, I did 4 years of mistakes, for example, 5 years of mistakes, or a decade of mistakes. I don't want to look back and say that was a meaningless period in my life that had no divine wisdom. Of course it did, because if I react to that properly, number one, I learn. I could show people how to learn from my own mistakes as well. Because it was a unique period. Post 9/11, dawah, a revert, coming into existence and trying to articulate Islam with no guidance. And then eventually he finds scholarly authorities, and he reads, and he goes back into academia, and then he studies, and you see this amazing journey. And I think that's powerful for people to look at.
For sure. And honestly, like it's sincerity too. And I find that people respect you the most, not for your intelligence, not for, your ability to articulate. They respect you the most when they think that you're genuine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I myself,
integrity.
Myself, I was younger. This is before 9/11. I was like 14, and I knew some people who had like a jihadi mindset, to be honest, right? And eventually, like, I came out in the media. I was like, listen, I had a brush with extremism when I was younger. I saw these things. It affected me, right? I didn't do anything about it, but like mentally it affected me, right? When they're making takfir of scholars, I was kind of like, maybe they're right. Maybe all the scholars are kuffar, right? So like, it had a mental effect on me. And when I come forward and I'm like, hey, I went through this, I was wrong, and I'm trying to do better. And these are the things I'm doing in my community to try to make the world better, to make sure kids don't fall into like the same problems I had. People actually respect you. Like, I had conservative journalists being like, I like Ibrahim, like he's really genuine, because they could see that sincerity, that I'm not above saying I made a failure when I was younger. I made a mistake, right? And sure, there were circumstances, and I was like 14. I was just like, you know, I didn't know anything about Islam to begin with, and things like that. But that I find it liberating.
Yes. No, of course.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. A lot of people sometimes say, "Why do you do this?" I remember I would get emails sometimes, and some brother would say, "This is the wrong approach. You shouldn't be like saying these things. You should hide it." And I'm like, look, you have to be transparent, because I always say to people, even when it comes to dawah, that your humility, your genuine humility, could be a means for guidance rather than your intellectual gymnastics. And I've seen it before. Just your character and the way you engage with people. Like, this guy is genuine. He's transparent. He's authentic, and we need authenticity. Now, when I do a brief surveying of people's social media profiles, we have a hell of a lot of inauthentic human beings, Muslims, expressing themselves. Like, this guy is not perfect. I know the guy. I had dinner with him the other day. Or it's just like we live in an age where we need two things: authenticity and rahmah, authenticity and mercy. And that's what's missing these days, especially when you see all the glamour and the marketing and the nice pictures. Don't get me wrong, it has its place. But as a personal public figure, if you want to use such terminology, being authentic and having integrity and showing that rahmah, I'm telling you, is so powerful. Yeah. It's so powerful.
Because I was thinking to myself the other day, I was like, the people who hate me in this world, like just everybody, if I think about everybody who dislikes me or even like straight up hates me, from like Islamophobes and like Jewish Defense League and like all the way down to like people went to school with me and just didn't like me. I'm like, all of them are justified in not liking me because of how sinful I am. They might not like me for the wrong reasons, but really I shouldn't feel like they're so wrong for not liking me, because subhanAllah, if they knew the real evil I've done and the real sins I've done, they'd be justified in disliking me, right? So,
absolutely. But that narrative needs to be expressed more, because when you see people's reactions, especially on social media, to public figures' potential or perceived failings, some of them are overjoyed, or some of them are like, I knew it. What does that say about the state of our own heart? It's like a form of nifaq, for you want a believer to fall, or even any human being to fall. I mean, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had a rahmah for everybody. He wanted everyone to be elevated. So that narrative, if it continues to come out, it's called enrolling people in your behavior. Because sometimes you know, when some converts come up to me and say, "There's no love at home," there's no love at home. I'm like, when was the last time you said to your parents you loved them? Never. Yeah. Well, you're part of the problem. You need to enroll people in your behavior. I know it's the kind of cliche, be the change, but it's true. But you have to do it in an authentic way, right? If I want more love at home, then I first have to start being loving. And then if you maintain that stance, it might take a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but eventually you're going to enroll others in your behavior, which I think is very, very important. So, more of this narrative should go out there. I think it's really powerful.
Absolutely. And I think like even from like a more meta understanding of like the dawah in general, I find that us not admitting our faults holds us back so much. And from the perspective as well that like people have to realize that like our groups that we're aligned with, even the theologies that we're part of and the scholars that we draw back to, when we're unable to recognize that there might be mistakes, there might be room for improvement, even not even want to call it a mistake sometimes, that we're holding ourselves back, right? So when Salafis are not self-critical, when even Ash'aris are not self-critical, right? And look at, we talked about kalam a little bit in this course and stuff, but like to say, hey, the kalam understanding of many of the scholars, there's a lot of good there. But there's also a lot of things that can't work today as well. But when we're all like, no, we're holding on to our tradition, we're holding on to the opinions of our scholars. We're not going to update it. We're not going to translate it to new context. We're just holding on to this.
I find that such a self-defeating mindset. It's self-defeating because the ulama developed this tradition, and some of it was as a result of a reaction to Hellenistic thinking, for example, or to social political circumstances of the time. Now, if you're saying, I'm not going to do the same, I'm going to stick to what they have, well, you're not really, because their methodology was applying the Quran and Sunnah and using that methodology to basically find solutions for the particular period if it was unprecedented. So why are you not doing that now?
Yeah.
You're contradicting that very methodology. That's why I always say to people, you don't give me quotes of the past. If you do, you need to find out who said it, why they said it, what context they said it, to whom they said it, and what was the social political context of the time. If you have that understanding, then you could quote people of the past. But what you should be doing is finding out what was their methodology, because their methodology produced amazing results for that time. But it may be those results may slightly differ for our time, because we have maybe different challenges, or there are certain subtle nuances. By the way, it could be the same. The results could be the same. But I prefer you to use the same methodology rather than just copying the results. And this is why when we've had a problem of atheism in our communities now, we haven't responded collectively, although we've had the answers, because the ulama of the past, they dealt with it. They laid a smackdown. Sorry for being colloquial, but they laid a smackdown on the dahriya, on the kind of empiricists of the time, of the mulhidun, of the deniers of God of the time. But they've learned all of that tradition, but they haven't been able to apply it in the contemporary sense with a new contemporary language. Why? Because they haven't really learned the tradition. They just learned what they said at that time. But if they learned the methodology, the kind of, Islamic thought, the essence behind the answers that they had at the time, then they would be able to apply it today. And they haven't, because of that mindset. It's like an intellectual gangsterism in a way. I know that sounds a bit too much, but don't get me wrong. I see myself as a traditionalist from that point of view, that we respect our ulama, we're standing on the shoulders, the inheritors of the prophets of the ulama, we respect them and love them. But I think what they wanted from us is to use their methodology, not just to copy the answers and think this is the tradition now. No, the tradition was the methodology. And that's very important.
And I think like the point is, like, even if you look at the different schools in the past, like the Athari school or the Ash'ari school, they had so many differences between each other. Of course, right?
Absolutely.
But the notion, like today, it's like everybody's so defensive. It's like, everything wrong. Like one group will be like, everything wrong with the ummah is because of the existence of that other group. And the other group's like, everything's wrong is the existence of that group. And we're all just sitting pointing fingers at each other. Meanwhile, we're losing so many kids because we're not talking to them.
I agree. I mean, I don't think the average youth even knows what these terms are. And if we study the history, this was a scholastic discussion. But what we've done, we've taken these scholastic discussions and we've made them popular. Why on earth? You got some miskeen human being, brother, sister, whoever they are, youth, coming to a masjid, and they're listening to these scholastic arguments that don't really make sense to their lives, and all they're thinking about is, my teacher said that God doesn't exist, my friends are atheists, you know what, they're really cool, it's starting to make sense. And they're having all of these doubts, and we're talking about things that don't really apply to them. So I think one of the dangers that has occurred is that we've taken that very nuanced scholastic discussion that was for the scholars, and we've made it very popular, and no one understands what people are saying anyway, generally speaking. So we have to now address people's needs, their social, spiritual, and intellectual needs in a way that can, penetrate their hearts and minds. And sometimes you'll be so surprised. All it is giving them a sense of belonging, giving them, some kind of, good reference or good argument. Say, of course the Prophet is a prophet. Of course, Allah exists. But also giving them that connection with Allah and teaching them this is why Allah deserves to be worshipped, and giving them that spiritual connection with Allah. And usually it solves the problem. But what we do, sometimes we create a narrative within our communities, and it is changing, by the way, that we basically just revive scholastic, nuanced discussions and apply it in a contemporary sense that is irrelevant, and that's sad.
So that seems to be like one of the major issues here in the UK, I think. Just from talking to you guys, it's like it seems.
Yes,
like
there is more. I mean, you guys in North America are more united, if you use such a term, and more balanced when you can have those different discussions. Like in our group, we have people from different backgrounds. You have people who are from Al-Azhar. Some of them have a Athari background. Some of them have a Ash'ari background. You have others who probably don't even have a background, or
Deobandi
whatever.
As well.
Deobandi. So some may be Maturidi, for example, and some may be a bit of both on different issues. I know one sheikh, he's a bit Ash'ari on this issue, he's a bit Athari on this issue, he's a bit Maturidi on this issue, for example. So there you go. But you guys get along, and we could have these discussions and have a discussion on those points of disagreement, but able to move forward. And that's where we structured the whole educational program to be as creed neutral as possible, although it's not.
Yeah.
But even if there are differences, we show them how they can use it within their framework as well.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we want people to be guided. We want people to be to have Jannah. That's it. Simple as that. We want people to taste the sweetness of Iman, so they love Allah, they know Allah, they obey Allah, and they direct all acts of worship to Allah alone. The other things other than that are secondary. Now, when I'm saying secondary, I'm not belittling them. I'm saying the crux of the matter is that people turn their hearts to Allah, and they have the opportunity to taste Jannah in this life and in the Akhirah. What I mean by Jannah in this life is the connection with Allah, and that they're able to go to paradise and be eligible for Allah's mercy. That's the goal, really. The other things, could be discussed later, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's interesting about this trip too is that we're largely from the same city, or at least in the same driving area. So some of the shuyukh here, I see them every once in a while. I'll go to the Imam Council meetings. They meet once a month. I'll go 2-3 times a year or something like that. I'm not that religious about going to it, but I'll meet some of the shuyukh there. And, just kind of, so I know them on a name basis. I
Sure.
see them, hey, how are you doing? And that's it. And then you have you kind of presuppose things about other shuyukh, right? So you're kind of this guy's kind of back home mentality, studied back home. His English is not that good. He probably doesn't really understand Canada. So you kind of in your mind, you compartmentalize them. You're this guy's not that great. If a kid comes to me with a problem, I'm not going to be go talk to that sheikh. I'm going to be go to Sheikh Adet. I'm going to be go to Sheikh Hussein. Don't go to this sheikh or that sheikh, because I don't trust them. I don't think they understand Canada and the Canadian context and stuff. Then when we came here and we're all talking, we're having these discussions, and we're taking these tests, and you're these guys are smart, right? These guys are really smart, and I didn't really know that at all. And now when we go back, I am going to refer people to them, right? I do have trust in them. I do think they're really intelligent.
Oh, wow.
But you don't actually know the other person. You kind of have these preconceived notions. And I'm sure they had about me too, right?
Absolutely.
When I talk, I'm my parents, of course, are Egyptian, but I was born and raised in Canada. I speak Arabic and I read Arabic and I write Arabic, but when I speak Arabic, it's kind of broken. It comes off kind of broken. Sure. It adds a thick accent to it, right? Because it's not my first language. Because my siblings all spoke English and everything. So when they hear me speaking with this thick English accent into Arabic, they're this guy must not know that much, right? And then when they see me talking here, they're oh, he does actually know stuff, right? So we're kind of we're getting to know each other at this level where beyond just what you guys are teaching in the class, there's so much benefit when we go back.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
And that was one of the secondary objectives as well, because I remember when one of the sheikhs basically said that this would be great for you guys because you're so busy in Canada and Toronto and the GTA area, you hardly meet. But you spent probably more hours together in the past few days
for sure
than you've spent in the past few years or something.
For sure.
Especially on this level. So that's powerful. That's absolutely powerful. So it creates that sense of unity and connection. Yeah. And we pre-frame people all the time.
Yeah.
We pre-frame people because we have our limited understanding, perspectives and experiences, and that becomes a lens in which we see other people. The art of being a human being is being able to break that lens and see people for who they are, coming to them as a blank canvas, and that is very difficult because you have to train yourself to believe that the past doesn't always equal the future. Maybe I've had a perception of him based on my limited experience that was in the past, but that doesn't imply that he is like that now, or it doesn't even imply that is the person that he is. And we do that in the dawah as well, which I think sometimes can be even more damaging. So if someone comes up to us and says, oh, I'm an atheist, all of a sudden you may think, because of your limited experiences and limited Google search, right, you may think, right, the guy loves science. You give them a scientific argument. But you've lost them because you haven't connected with them because they don't care. You've given dawah to your judgment. You haven't given dawah to them. And then eventually you may find out that person is only an atheist because his parents died when he was 5 years old. But you would never know because, we have this kind of arrogance of our own limited perceptions and experience. We know it must be this way because I've got limited understanding of atheism and limited experiences, but those experiences are everything and it's the absolute. And therefore, when he says he's atheist, therefore I'm going to treat him in this way. But that's obviously false. And actually that perspective, if we're able to break that link between our limited experiences and perceptions and ideas, to break the link between that and our understanding of people, even our relations at home will get fixed. You know that auntie who was gave you a bad look at that wedding when you were a child, and then you've understood her actions and her character through that limited one negative experience. Now you need to learn to break that, because maybe everything she's subsequently done has been genuine and based on love and based on mercy, but you won't see that because you got the wrong lenses on, and they're the lenses of the past, and they're the lenses of your negative limited experience. And it doesn't follow that therefore that person is like that. Maybe they had a bad day, or maybe you just took it the wrong way. You know, and that happens so many times. That happened with me and my father, man. Like when I became Muslim, because my father was always a hero for me, when I became Muslim, I had to try and reconcile that. And I couldn't reconcile it because, okay, he's a Muslim. I'm a Muslim. He's not a Muslim. But he was my hero. That means he can't be my hero now, which was a forced thing to do anyway. So therefore, I just created a drama within myself that I had to find everything that was wrong with him. I spent around 5 years at least finding out what was wrong with him and highlighting and accentuating it. And really, I made him feel bad. I remember once I was arguing with him in the garden, and then he got so broken that he said to me, "Is this what Islam teaches you to treat your father?" Oh, it was like, I was, you know. So I went to this kind of psychological course thing that teaches you that you're a pile of crap and that you just ego. So anyway, one of the exercises was to have a breakthrough with your father. So, and I realized all that about myself during the course. And then I just called my dad. I said, "Dad, you're still my hero. We may have different ideas. You're still my hero. I still love you. You're the best grandfather. You're this, that, the other." He started crying. I think there's only 3 times I've heard my dad cry in my life. Wow. And then he called my mother in the evening, and he said to her, you know, he felt complete, that he could pass away now. Wow. And ever since then, we've had that breakthrough. It's amazing. Our relationship has been totally different. Wow. That one breakthrough. But the one breakthrough, and you know what it was? It was based on my own ego. So what that teaches me is we have the power to change our relationships, because if you always blame the other, which is like a victimhood mindset, right? Yeah. You've given them all the power to control your destiny together, or, you know, the way you interact together. Take that power back by asking yourself, what can I do? What perspectives can I change? What faults did I have? Yeah. You know, and do your best to have that breakthrough. And I'm telling you, it changes everything. It changes absolutely everything. You know, then after I saw all the greatness of my dad again, like he took care of his dad for like 3 years and nursed him, you know. And, you know, and my grandfather passed away, and my dad took care of him, and to the point where he was, you know, my grandfather was a big guy, and he would pick him up and clean him, you know, and everything, wash him and bathe him. And my dad was the kind of guy that hated nursing, not because he's not merciful, but he was like a bit squeamish, right? Yeah. But he would do all of that for my grandfather. And I was like, oh my God, you know, this guy's a hero kind of thing, you know?
The majority of our fights against our parents is usually us fighting ourselves. You know?
Absolutely. That's so deep. Yeah. That's so deep.
SubhanAllah.
Oh my God, that's so deep.
SubhanAllah. And like, you know, this is the thing. I mean, we all think about it, and I don't know who amongst us is like perfect to our parents, right? I know I'm definitely not that person, but it's that thing that as you get older, you start being like, wow, I was such an idiot when I was a teenager.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was such an idiot. And I see my sister, like my sister's younger, and she's like 7 years younger than me, and she's having friction with her parents too. And I'm just like, man, when you get older and you have kids, you're going to be like, yeah, but she can't know. And
but it's so true. My mom would always say, when you have children, you don't know. Yeah. And I was like, what is she talking about? The minute I had Zakaria, my first son, my first child, I realized 2 things. Well, the first major thing I realized was, oh my God, I've been such a bad son. If my son does this to me, I'll be broken. Yeah. If my son does what I did to my father, I'll be broken. Like literally broken. And I was at work at that time. I used to work as a program office manager in project management for local government in London. And, you know, I had people around me. I was showing them pictures and giving them like, you know, free fruit or cakes. Yeah. And I just said, oh my God, I've been such a bad dad. I nearly broke down crying. It was like, these are awakenings, isn't it? You know? And that's quite interesting, because you could have intellectualized that concept to me and I would never had that awakening. Yeah. You only have that awakening when you experience it. It's true. And that's why there's such a big difference between knowing something and being something. Such a fundamental difference. Exactly. And that's why people who are self-taught in the Islamic tradition, you can tell. You can tell they have very bad, not bad, but they don't have a refined character. They don't have, they maybe lack a bit of that rahmah. They're a bit, you know, fast off the mark kind of thing. But people who have studied with ulama, you can tell.
Yeah.
You can just tell. There's like almost an unwritten spiritual law. The Prophet studied from Jibreel alayhi salam.
Yeah.
The Sahaba from the Prophet sallam. The Tabi'een from the Sahaba. So there's always been that kind of link. And there's almost that kind of unwritten spiritual law that you're going to learn something from a scholar that you would never learn from a book. Yeah. I learned that from Sheikh Akram Nadwi, for example, when we did the tafsir of Surah Yusuf. I'm like, you could read this in the book. But just him being there and the way he was delivering and his reaction to questions, like, it was tarbiyah, it was amazing. Yeah. I remember at one point when we were going through Surah Rahman, I believe, he basically was corrected by someone in the audience, the student in the audience, like in a kind of like, you're wrong. And it looked like Sheikh Akram was wrong on a particular point. What did Sheikh Akram do? I never saw it that way. You know what, you're right, I was wrong. And just continued. I was like, wow. That is humility. Yeah. You would never learn that from a book. That I just tasted humility. Yeah. I could. If you've never eaten an apple before, I can describe it to you, but you would only know what it tastes like when you take a bite. I took a bit of bite there, and that teaches you something that you can never learn from a book. So the experiential component is undervalued as well from an Islamic point of view.
Yeah, no, it's so powerful. I mean, because I've done both. Like I've done online studying with scholars from Al Azhar and different institutes, and then I've also done in person. And you're right. Like one of my first teachers, he said this. He was strict with us, right? Like we would come into the class, and it was in the masjid, the musalla. And we all leaned back with our backs on the wall. And he'd come in, he's like, everybody 2 feet off the wall. He's like, you gotta be off the wall. So that you're sitting up straight, you're listening, you're not leaning back on the wall. You're
present,
sleeping, And he would be like, all these different things that he would like do to instill discipline in us. And he would be like, how do you learn adab? How do you take adab? How do you take etiquette? He's like, you can learn it, you can understand it from a book, but you learn it either from a sheikh or from your parents, or from somebody who teaches it to you through you being with them, right? You studying with them, you going to the market with them, you going to their home with them, right? Like when you see it being acted out, that's the only way you're going to internalize it.
Absolutely.
You can learn it, sure, through a book, but you're never going to internalize it.
Sadaqah? You could teach a child all the hadith and ayat on sadaqah. And I'm telling you, they won't be a person of sadaqah. They'll be a person of sadaqah when you go to the marketplace, you buy a bunch of apples and say, right, we're not having any, give it to all the poor people, give it to everyone. Or you give them, a $5 note or $10 note. I don't know what notes you guys have. And you just basically give it to this person. That would teach them more than just abstractly, memorizing a hadith. Don't get me wrong, that's very powerful to do so as well. There's a barakah, but you have to link it to the behavior. So when they learn a hadith, for example, on sadaqah or an ayah on sadaqah, now they should practice it and link it back to that hadith. And that's very important because we live now in an age of memorization rather than internalization.
It's crazy. I mean, that's the whole thing with our parents. And what's interesting is that, like, Allah tells you the second most important thing after worshiping me, being good to your parents. And we understand it and we know it and we we'll rattle it off, right? How many verses does Allah say? وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا? We could rattle them all off. But then doing it is different. Right? And entering your heart is different. Which is interesting because it connects to this whole idea of, we're talking about atheism during this course. And one of the things that keeps coming up, I've seen atheists do this multiple times, where they're like, can you believe that the Quran, I mean, they're more crude in the way they say it, but can you believe that the Quran says that intellect is in the heart, right? Because the verse, أَلَمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا, do they have hearts with which they understand? Like, that's nonsense, that's crazy. I'm like, subhanAllah, it's actually the most accurate thing and one of the most profound verses in the Quran. Yes, our heart is what understands. Our mind is just a tool of our heart, right? Like your mind could understand something intellectually, but not really, apply it because your heart's not there.
Absolutely.
Right? I know going to the gym with you after this is going to be good for my body, but I might not do it because my heart's not into it, right? And I think you brought up that example before. Of course. There's so many examples of it. And the reality is, like, sometimes we're looking at data, like the creation of the universe and, all these amazing things that we see. You're looking at the data and an atheist guy is looking at the same data. And you have the same IQ and he has the same IQ. And you see Allah and he sees kufr.
Yes, true.
Because your heart is pushing you one way and his heart is pushing you a different way.
Absolutely. And that's why, some people could have the same data and they have different conclusions. And that, as you said, is definitely because of the state of heart. And that's why for me, especially now, just from experience, giving dawah, one of the essential things that you have to do is learn how to have the characteristic of the du'at, the characteristics of the du'at, which include rahmah, which include forbearance, hilm, having halim. Allah is al-halim, and we must manifest that in a human-centric way. So we must have a sense of forbearance. But how do you develop these traits? They're not like algorithms you put into your brain and you just basically act them out. They're the derivative of your state of heart. So what do you do to facilitate that? How do you make your heart in the right state so you can have halim and rahmah and forbearance and sabr and being able to call people to the truth and taking leadership? Well, you need to train your heart. How do you do that? Find out what the diseases are, try and root them out. Walk on the path of purification of the heart, and that would include dhikr and dua and reading Quran and extra prayers and exercises. We know these exercises from our pious predecessors like Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an, like self-psychological flagellation. Not that I think you should do it, I've been so bad, look what I did last week. But practicing humility, practicing these things and reminding yourself about death, which is so important. So
it's crazy because like our community almost wants to resist the mercy in Islam. I told you, like, I had one day invited some people from the Jewish community to come for Jummah to see what Jummah was like. So I gave a khutbah, and the khutbah was about rahmah, was about mercy. I gave the whole khutbah, and then at the end I said, we have these guests here, and they came, from the other end of the city to see what a mosque is like and see what Jummah is like and all of that. And I finished the prayer, and I didn't know how people would react. I had no clue. So I'm like expecting almost somebody's going to come and yell at me, right? There's a lot of raw emotions around like the issues of Israel and Palestine,
yes,
of course, and stuff like that. So you never know how people are going to react. And I see this old man come up to me after Jummah, and he's angry, man. He's like upset. And I'm like, okay, he's going to ream me out right now, right? Like, how dare you bring non-Muslims into the masjid, into the musalla, like actually that area, not like sitting on the outside or anything. And he comes and he doesn't even care about that. You know what his issue was? He's like, you're talking too much about mercy. You're telling these kids that Allah is merciful, they're just going to go do sins. Why are you talking so much about mercy?
Well, yeah, I think it's the opposite. We've been teaching our kids, especially in the ethno-religious communities, we've been teaching our children that, it's all about punishment. You're going to get punished, you're going to get punished. Don't do that, shaitan, this, that, the other. Yeah. So don't get me wrong, you do need that balance. Yeah. But at the end of the day, rahmah is far more powerful than anything else.
How many people sin because they don't understand rahmah? Right? Like the person sins, he makes a mistake, because we're all human. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all make mistakes. But then he's like, oh man, I made a mistake, maybe even it's a major sin. There's no hope for me. I'm going to hell for sure.
So they do more sins.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. I've seen that a lot, so many times. And when you make the people understand that Allah is merciful, He forgives, Ya ibadi, oh my servants, do not despair of my mercy, for I forgive all sins. That there is hope, that there is that light at the end of the tunnel, that there is the possibility for transformation and change. And that even if you repent and you slip again, that Allah is waiting for you. He is waiting for you to come back. That's the whole point of the human being. The whole point of the human being, the Adamic character, is when you sin, for you to be humble enough to learn words of repentance and give them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in that process you're turning back. Allah says in the Quran, oh you believers, repent to Allah, turn back to Allah jami'an, collectively, right? We need to have this kind of collective tawbah, right? Which is interesting because it assumes that you're going to be in a state of sin, right? Generally speaking, because you're turning back from what? From misguidance, from sin, from mistakes, from just your own imperfections as a human being, from your own errors. So rahmah is very important, absolutely. Obviously it has to be contextualized within the correct theological framework. We're not saying do anything and you're going to go paradise. That's ridiculous. But it is a time of rahmah. And what's interesting, even non-Muslim academics and commentators are actually, understanding that, especially when it comes to young people, especially young males, they don't hear even words of encouragement. They don't even hear words of encouragement, sometimes never in their life. Wow.
And subhanallah, So lots of ulama from different backgrounds said this is the time, this is the age of rahmah.
Yeah. Yeah, and we
So
have a lot
true.
to do. We have a lot to do, and that's why when I go to Japan, not that I've been. Say I were to go to Japan, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the most moral person, because Japanese people have a lot of akhlaq. Yeah, generally speaking, I know globalization has taken over X, Y, and Z, but generally speaking, there are people of good manners. I'm not going to say my manners is going to bring them to Islam now, because they'll surpass me. Yeah. So it's contextual. So what I'll do, I'll talk to them about Tawheed.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Thing they don't
Now,
have.
but in our society, as an individualistic society, generally speaking, you know, our tradition of rahmah can really, really do a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can do a lot. And
It's interesting. Actually, I read that Japanese tourists, when they want to visit France, the travel agencies will make them go through a course before they go, because too many Japanese people went to France on vacation and came back traumatized.
No.
Yeah, like, because the difference between like the politeness of, you know, Japanese society and the rudeness of like French.
Imagine they go to New York or something. Oh my god.
Yeah, so they actually treat them like, listen, you're gonna go to the hotel, they're gonna treat you like this, you know, because if you go to a hotel in Japan, like they're like you're their house guest, right? Like they want to do everything for you, kind of thing. Whereas like you go to France and like customer service is like completely different experience.
No, but it's so true. That's why I like going to North America, because in the UK, generally speaking, I mean, there is customer service, but it's not as good as America. Like, I know because you guys have the tipping culture as well, which helps with the servicing. But still, you feel like kingly almost. Even when you go to like, what's that low class breakfast place in Canada?
Like Denny's?
Denny's. I love Denny's, man. I'm treated like a king at Denny's. And the guys were telling me in Canada, what are you talking about? That's a low class type of breakfast joint. I was like, no. You were really polite to me. They said, take your time. I had like 2 liters of coffee. This is what else would you like, sir? They're smiling at me. I was like, well, this is really nice. They actually want me here. Yeah, honestly.
Actually, that was the first thing that happened when we got here and we got to the hotel. And there was another customer complaining to the guy at the hotel.
Oh, right. Oh, dear.
And like he's reaming him out. He's like, man, like this is 3 times I've asked you guys to wake me up at a certain time and you guys are not waking me up. And I was late for work. And he's like really going. And the guy behind the counter was just like, yeah, oh well. I was like, what? Like, you know, we got the customer's always right kind of philosophy. You know, you should be like, I'm sorry. And like, you know, it'll never happen again. And here's something for free to make you feel good. It was like not happening over here. So interesting. But I guess it's like that cultural shift.
Yeah, those cultural differences are.
But you're right. Each culture has.
And I wonder why, though. That'd be interesting. I wonder why they have those cultural differences.
Yeah. Even though like we know like British people are supposed to have like the perfect decorum. You know, like they know what to say, the most polite thing to say, the most polite. But there's a difference there. It's almost like they know the decorum of being polite, but they don't necessarily have like the ruh of being nice.
They have the law, but not the spirit, right?
Because Canadians are the opposite. We don't have the decorum, but like Canadians are really nice, man.
I went to Fort McMurray to do some Dawah training and do some seminar stuff on atheism, right? And they were telling me that in the masjid there, when there was that terrorist attack, I think in Montreal or Quebec, the non-Muslims, they were not invited, around 100 of them.
Yeah.
They went all around the masjid holding hands, creating a ring of friendship.
Yeah.
And the imam there, he was like almost crying. He was like, I don't know what to do. These people are amazing.
Yeah, it happened in so many different cities. We have a mosque in Stratford, which is like it's kind of like a tourist town. And in the summer they have like Shakespeare festivals and things like that. And it's just like in the middle of nowhere. It's all white people. There's like 50 Muslims there. And same thing happened. They just like the whole community, the whole city came out and like wrapped themselves around the mosque the week after.
That shows empathy, I think.
It does.
It does, because you're saying to yourself, right, it's been attacked. We've been attacked. Canada's been attacked, and some people may be blaming a certain minority, and we don't want them to feel that we're blaming them, and we don't want them to feel disenfranchised or alienated or that they're their enemy. And they went out and they did outreach. That's powerful.
It is.
That's powerful.
And I mean,
Allah guide these people, man. It's amazing.
And from my perspective, like I'm on the ground working and I'm working with different like activists and things like that. And sometimes I'm seeing a lot of like the negative. I'm seeing all these Islamophobic groups. I'm seeing the support they get sometimes from pretty high up in government. I'm seeing all the problems, right? That's why it's good to travel sometimes. Just pop your head out and look at different countries. And like, it's not too bad in Canada. You know, I should be thankful too.
Oh, there are places in Europe where it would be very difficult to be an imam.
Yeah.
So there is that. There's there's a huge contrast between certain European countries and North America. And that's why, generally speaking, living in Britain, living in Canada and America, for example, that side of the West, we're still relatively fortunate compared to other. I always say to the brothers and the sisters, look, being Muslim in Britain is actually a blessing compared to other countries. And it's good to see those blessings. It doesn't mean things can't change, and things must change, because there's a lot of things that we can change for the better, not only for Muslims but for non-Muslims as well.
For sure.
So I'm not naive. I do appreciate that, but I think we should always start with our blessings.
For sure.
And alhamdulillah, we're blessed to be here.
It helps ground you. I think when you're always looking at the negative, you get depressed.
Well, not just that, it's technically wrong. You're seeing one side of the story.
That's true.
So you're just following something that is wrong by definition. You're only looking at this, or you're overemphasizing one aspect of reality, which is the negative. Well, you need to be a bit more holistic.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the biggest dangers of the Muslim community is this whole issue of Islamophobia. Don't get me wrong, I know it exists, but a lot of Islamophobia is because of dawah phobia, in my view. Yes, there are political elements to it too, but what I'm trying to say here is that we haven't done enough to basically express ourselves in society and say, look, this is who we actually are. Obviously we don't have the media, we don't have, we're not influential in law or politics, so therefore we can't really push things forward in a massively influential way, but we can do something. And sometimes we lack that. That essence of just, conveying the call and showing who we are, what our values are, what our tradition is, trying to reconnect humanity back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think one of the reasons for that as well is that we've adopted the pathology of having a victim mindset. So having a victim mindset is false, but being victimized is true, because people can be victimized. They can be objects of oppression and negativity. But that doesn't follow, therefore, one must have a victim mindset. That's actually a pathology, because you actually now believe that someone else has the power to control your destiny, right? You see power as very binary from that point of view. Oh, it's the oppressors, it's the evil ones, it's their fault, and they're doing it. And therefore, you've got no control anymore. You've got no power to do anything, and you become a victim.
Lose your
agency. And that shapes everything that you see. I think this is so against the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From my very limited understanding of the seerah, he would never act like a victim. He was empowered through circumstances, because he always connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always. To the point when he was stoned in Taif, right, for hours, according to some of the ulama. Look at the dua that he made, right? And fine, whether you think that was a authentic part of his story or not is neither here or there. The point I'm saying is, look at any example and you see a very empowered individual that would see negativity and positivity as a new realm of possibility to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He didn't see it the other way. Oh, we're doomed, it's victim, they're all to blame, and that is so disempowering. And for me, it's almost a creedal issue, or an issue of, are you connected to Allah? Because if you're always thinking in that way, that we can't change it, it's therefore they're to blame, and if they get removed then everything's going to be fine, that issue itself is almost saying that Allah doesn't have the power to change your reality. It's them, right? Sometimes I hear, certain brothers and sisters always focusing on this perceived enemy, and they do more dhikr of the perceived enemy than the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think we can be empowered by understanding who Allah is. We always say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no true power apart from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that really mean practically? It really means that everything happens because of Allah's qudra and irada. Everything happens because of His power and His will. And that's the point. If that you truly internalize that, then anything that happens in the world, they're just empty tools that Allah uses to manifest His will. Therefore, connect straight to Him. Don't give those things intrinsic power. Allah has intrinsic power. That's why the Sahaba were so successful. They were equivalent of a village in Fort McMurray. After one man, one book, they basically took over the whole of Europe, right? Really, from that point of view, they were spreading, the rahmah of Islam everywhere. They were so empowered because of their connection with Allah. But unfortunately, sometimes I think we have a little bit of I don't know if you experience this in Canada.
It's interesting because So I've been thinking about this a lot too, right? And it's kind of like something percolating in my mind. And then recently there was an issue in Toronto. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but there was a report that came out that an 11-year-old girl wears hijab, was walking to school, and she reported that a guy attacked her with scissors and tried to cut her hijab.
Okay.
So this came out, and it was like all the news everywhere. And then basically, I think it was a Friday that this came out. And then on the Monday, the police released a statement saying it's not true, it never happened.
Oh.
And basically, they were like, the girl lied. Now, I think it's actually more complicated than that. But one of the things that happened, the brothers were, someone messaged on my Facebook and was like, don't you think this is because we have this victim mentality? That it's almost like we get to a point where people want to be the victim. You're special if you're the victim. You know, you have something to talk about if you're a victim. We're looking at ways, how has this person victimized me so that I can go on Twitter and write about how I'm a victim of this person or this institution, or like we're just craving it, you know? And it's such an interesting point. And I'm thinking about it from two minds kind of thing, where on the one hand, I'm like, one of the issues is that some people will use this, oh, you guys just have a victim mentality, to silence victims. Like people who've actually been oppressed. You're like, just be quiet, you're just pretending to be a victim. You have this victim mindset, so you're just silencing them. But then the other hand is true, like we're going to the other extreme of like, we're craving being victims. We get attention on social media when we're talking about how we're victims. You know what I mean? Like you end up falling into this mindset of, yes, I'm a victim. Who are all the people victimizing me? And like you said, you lose your agency.
Of course,
right? You don't have that like, ability.
I mean, even in political philosophy, in some literature, they actually have chapters on the victimhood mindset.
Yeah.
And they've understood that it is a form of a pathology. Mm-hmm. Now, just because you shouldn't have a victimhood mindset, it doesn't mean you're not a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to, give therapy, if you want to use such a term, to a victim, is to empower them so they don't adopt a victimhood mindset. Right. That's how you deal with someone who's become a victim.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what we do, yes, some of us may be victims of Islamophobia, of attacks, of this, that, the other, of ideological elements, political elements, pressure, oppression, whatever. But it doesn't now mean you have to adopt the mindset, because that mindset is going to continue the cycle of you being a victim.
Right.
If you're going to break through that, you need to be empowered in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important. And I just find it very disempowering, man.
And you're right. I mean, the Prophet, one of the hadiths I mentioned in my khutbah was that, the Prophet, when he's in Mecca and they're twisting his name instead of Muhammad, they're calling him Mudamdam, the dispraised, and they're making poetry along that lines and stuff like that. And the Prophet turns to his companions and he's like, don't you see how Allah saved me from their cursing? Like, what are you talking about? They're cursing you all the time, right? He's like, no, they're cursing this other guy called Mudamdam. That's not my name, right? Like, even like their attempts to victimize him, he's just overlooking it, pretending like it didn't happen, right?
Yes.
Because he doesn't want to be like their victim. And like you said, Ta'if was an interesting one, because the hadith actually is after Uhud, and the Prophet's teeth are broken and his fingers are cut off in Uhud, and his uncle is killed. Like the amount of trauma at Uhud is tremendous. Mm-hmm. And Aisha asks him, was this the worst day of your life? And he's like, no, there was a day worse than that. She said, what day was it? He said, the day I went to a Ta'if and I offered myself to them and they did not respond the way I wanted to. And that's it. Like, he doesn't be like, they did this to me and they did this to me and they were so cruel to me.
That's so powerful.
He didn't even go and she's the one asking him. He's not like going around telling people his story, his sob story, and trying to get sympathy, right? She's asking him.
That's so deep.
Right? And then he's just saying, this is like,
SubhanAllah.
I offered myself to them. They rejected me, not in a way that I liked. Then you read the testimony of the Sahaba and the testimony of the disbelievers who converted to Islam afterwards, who were there. Then you get the details. How they stoned him, how he was bleeding, how it was a mob all of a sudden. He probably thought he was going to be killed and he's just running frantically for his life, subhanAllah.
That's
then
so
you
powerful.
get the details of the oppression, right? He doesn't tell you it, right? Because he's not being like, I'm a victim and look at all of the stuff that happened to me, right?
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
You need to write about that.
Yeah.
You should do an article on that. Honestly, that would be so powerful.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah.
Let's collaborate on it. Let's write together.
Yeah, I'll write the title. You can do the rest. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Honestly, man, like I feel like I've been really selfish and like stealing your time. And
no,
stuff.
don't be silly. It's well worth spent.
Yeah, I think like honestly, people need to hear us beyond just like the lecture
Yeah, I agree.
khutbah kind of.
I think people prefer this anyway.
platform.
I've noticed.
yeah.
I did a podcast a few months ago, I think,
Mhm.
with I forgot their name now. Another podcast people, brothers,
Okay.
good brothers.
In America?
No, it was in
Oh.
England. It was in the UK,
England? Oh, okay.
and freshly grounded. Yeah, and people loved it. You know, just
Mm.
like a chit chat,
Yeah.
getting your insights on things.
Yeah.
You know, talked about anything and everything, and people actually learned quite a lot from it.
Honestly, I learned just like talking from you. Like you brought up points that like jot my memory. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize other people made that connection too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's like, yeah,
Absolutely.
subhanallah,
So as I say, it's good to talk.
for sure.
Yeah, I think that was a British Telecom's advert one-liner. It's good to talk. But yeah, so definitely, I mean, and more people with differences should talk in this kind of nice, amicable way as well.
Mhm.
Because I'm a true believer of people expressing ideas in public, because I really believe the truth will prevail. It will be apparent.
Yeah.
It'll be apparent. And the process of conversation is good development for yourself, because, okay, I need to refine my ideas on this. It's not too
Yeah.
accurate. Actually, I came across a bit arrogant in this way. I need to start reflecting upon myself. You know,
Mhm.
are my ideas as a result of clear thinking, or is there some kind of other psychological, psychodynamic issue going on?
Mhm.
That's the whole process of conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process of discovering yourself and discovering others and discovering the truth eventually. So
So
Jazakallah
true.
khair.
Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate your
No,
time.
anytime. May Allah bless you.
Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah.
The Hindi Project podcast is produced by Castwork Studio.